when we look to Him. And not only do we look to Him, we need to look on the inside of us. What is happening on the inside of us as we're overwhelmed? We know when we're overwhelmed, we tend to look at the situation instead of the Lord, instead of His guidance, instead of His leadership. But staying focused on Jesus is the key, no matter how or what you are overwhelmed with in life. And you know, the minute that life becomes overwhelming, we tend to stop looking at Jesus, and we tend to start looking at our problems that we have in life. We can't stop thinking about what's destroying our relationships. We can't stop thinking about what's going on in this season of life. We begin to focus on this situation in this season of life. We begin to focus on the overwhelming storm in life instead of looking not only to Him, but what is happening on the inside of us. You know, we can't stop thinking about, hey, what gets our anxiety up? We can't stop thinking on what gets our blood pressure up in life. But I want to remind you of something. The moment that you gave your life to Jesus, come on, the moment that you gave your life to Jesus, He began to direct your path in life. We know Proverbs chapter 3, 5, and 6. This is a scripture from today. It tells us, it says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not, come on, say lean not on your own, what? On your own understanding in life. It says, in all ways, no matter how overwhelmed you are, in all ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. So often we look at the direction of our path. We look how we would direct it, how we would solve the problem ourselves. And before we know it, we're talking to this one and that one. We're texting and calling. We're having conversations because we want someone to agree with our direction in life instead of the way the Lord is directing our path that we have in life. But while His plans, God does have plans for us, but sometimes His plans in life, it begins to include storms in our life. And His plans not only have storms in life, but in the storms of life, He does have a rescue for those plans also. But also in those storms, in those plans of life, can I tell you, life requires faith. Life requires faith to endure the storms. Are we not in storms in life? If you're not, I don't believe you're living or breathing. We do have all storms in life, all seasons in life, and in these storms in life, it requires our faith to be activated to endure the storm of life. You know, I once heard someone say that we're either in a storm, we're on our way to a storm, or we're getting out of a storm. You know, we're on the verge of reaching disaster because our eyes are on the storm instead of being fixed on Jesus. Remember Peter. Peter discovered the fact that when he stepped out of the boat and he began to walk on the water toward Jesus, he said, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, not the storms of life. You see, as the disciples, they sailed off, did they not? They began to sail off, and Jesus is the one that stayed behind. He stayed behind and he began to go up on a mountain. He went up on the mountain because he wanted to spend some time alone, and he wanted to pray and have some one-on-one time with his Father. But when the evening came, there was a storm that came up on the water where the disciples were. And as the disciples were out there, they battled the waves and they battled the water all night long. I believe it was around maybe 3 a.m. in the morning, they began to look up and they seen what they thought was a ghost that was walking upon the water. But this ghost that they thought that they seen, this ghost was Jesus that was walking on the water. Then Jesus called out in Matthew 14:27, he said, "Be of good cheer." He said, "It's I, Jesus." He said, "Do not be afraid." And at the sight of Jesus, can I tell you, Peter did something with his faith in the middle of that storm, in the middle of the things that were overwhelming him in his life. The other disciples were in the boat. We forget about them also. But the other disciples were in the boat. But Peter, this particular disciple, in the storm with the rest of them, he decided to activate his faith. He decided to look at something else other than the storm that was coming at him. At the sight of Jesus walking in the storm, walking into what was overwhelming him, Peter grew bold faith, and he asked Jesus to command him to come and walk on the raging storms in the sea. Jesus said, "Peter, come on, Peter." And Peter began to step out, as we know, and as he began to step out on the things that were overwhelming him, as they were trying to overcome him. Can I tell you, when he began to step out, fear began to creep in. Do we not have that happen in our life? Fear began to creep in, and then Peter began to sink in what was overwhelming him. But as he began to sink, Jesus caught him, and he said, "Oh, Peter, you have little faith. Peter, why do you doubt me, Peter?" They both began to get inside of the boat, Jesus and Peter, and as both of them began to get on the inside of the boat, can I tell you what was overwhelming him began to calm. Can I tell you the waves began to stop. The seas began to be silent out there because Peter had called. He didn't just focus on Jesus, he focused on what was with him, and his name was Jesus. And can I tell you, when he began to focus on Jesus instead of what was overwhelming him, can I tell you, there was suddenly peace that began to come over him. Not only that, the wind and the rain, they began to stop there. Can I tell you, Jesus was with them in the waters just as he was with them inside of that boat. Jesus was not blind, and Jesus was not distracted. He showed up in the middle of the storm, in the middle of what was overwhelming them. He showed up right on time. I want to remind you that Jesus, in your storm, in what's overwhelming you in life, can I tell you that Jesus, he's not left you either. Maybe we seem to be weighed down over the years with things that we've wasted over the years. Maybe we sometimes are weighed down with situations that we're in. We're weighed down with what if I would have in life. Sometimes if we're not careful, these things of what we wish, what we want, our desires, maybe where we even are in life, it's not what we thought it would look like 20 years or 30 years ago. But as they were laid down in life, can I tell you, fear began to push him around. And if we're not careful, fear will begin to push us around also. Maybe you're weighed down because your news feed on social media, maybe that news feed, it begins to spit out a bunch of negativity to you. Maybe you're weighed down because what you see, there is a comparison game that you're going through in life. I'll never compare to this what I'm seeing on social media. Maybe you can feel like sometimes that all hope is gone. It's never going to change. It's always going to remain the same. If we're not careful, that overwhelming situation that goes through will begin to define us. But let me remind you, your future for tomorrow is secure. You see, what you find yourself dealing with is a season. It's not a sentence. What you find yourself dealing with, it's a season. It's not a sentence in life. If we keep our eyes focused on Jesus. Jesus is the one that gets you. Jesus is the one that has you. Jesus told the disciples, he's the one that told them. Remember, he's the one that told them, I want you to go to the other side. He didn't give them a choice of what to do. They were not in the middle of the storm because they had messed up. They weren't in the middle of the storm because they had failed, because they had made mistakes after mistakes in life. They were there because of divine instruction by Jesus. He told them to go to the other side. Jesus is the one that put them in that storm. He knew that they would receive something in that storm and what was about to overcome them. He knew that they would receive something in that overwhelming situation that they would never receive if they stayed in the same place, if they stayed on the land. So he sent them somewhere that they were going to encounter a storm. They were going to encounter a situation that would soon overwhelm them. You see, God didn't create the storm that we go through in life. He didn't create these storms to hurt us in life. He allowed you to be exactly where you are in order to show you things that you can only learn in that storm. You see, even when you make poor decisions and you create storms yourself, that you could have got out and you could have avoided these storms in life, can I tell you, God is still with you when we make foolish, just plain stupid mistakes in our life. But it's simply mistakes that we make in life. See, in those mistakes, there's a struggle. But in those struggles is where we learn to overcome the situations. Is that not what the disciples begin to go through? They learned to overcome because they were placed in a storm. They learned to overcome because they were in a situation. See, the most urgent, or I guess we could say the most critical thing that we could do in a storm, in a boat, would be to keep rowing. To keep rowing. If we give up when we're in that storm, can I tell you that storm that's coming over us is going to capsize us. It's going to overwhelm us. We're going to take on more than we can handle, and that boat begins to sink. We do the same thing in life. When we stop rowing, when we stop striving, when we stop going toward Jesus, can I tell you, it begins to overwhelm us. It begins to fill us. And before we know, we're in a situation that we feel like that we're sinking also. You see, what the enemy wants to do, what Satan wants to do, is he wants you to drop those oars. He wants you to drop those paddles in life, and he wants you to give up. He wants you to stay right where you are so he can overwhelm you in life where you are. You see, he's going to distract you from listening to maybe worshipful music, powerful messages of faith, because there's power found in these two things. In these two things, there is power that you can move mountains, overwhelming situations in your life. You see, in these situations of life, we begin to focus on the promises of God, on the promises that reinforce our faith. You see, when God sees you worship, he sees you activating your faith. He notices how you push through discouragement and how you begin to give him glory in life. And when we learn to do that in faith, that's when the glory begins to come and it begins to overwhelm us. But we have to keep rowing. We have to keep rowing. And the glory of God, the presence of God will show up and it will begin to operate in our life. See, when we even go through maybe family situations, and they're tough. When you make financial decisions and challenges in life and sickness, sometimes the sickness that we go through, it seems too much in life. That's when we need to take that deep breath and we need to lift our hands and say, God, I'm here. God, I'm going to keep rowing. God, I'm going to move. I'm going to activate in my faith. I'm going to worship you regardless of the circumstance. I'm going to walk out my faith regardless of the circumstance. God, I'm not going to quit rowing. I'm not going to quit rowing until you show up. That's the faith that we must have. Not just keep our eyes on him, but activate what is on the inside of us as a believer. You see, sometimes when you're outside, you'll notice the wind. Sometimes the wind is at your back. And it feels like everything's going good. And sometimes when you're outside, you'll notice that the wind is on your face. And it feels like everything is coming against you. You know, don't let the direction of things that's coming against you or going against you determine whether you believe God is there or God is not there in your life working. Just because you have things that are overwhelming you, just because you have circumstances, different seasons, different chapters, different books in your life, these things begin to come against you, doesn't mean that you have done anything wrong in your life. It means that you have to row the boat. It means that you have to keep rowing that boat one stroke at a time. You see, Jesus, he's seen those disciples. He's seen them rowing in the storm. And he sees you rowing in the storm of life also. You see, God sees the times you slip. He sees the times that we make mistakes. He sees the times that we just slip and sometimes we fall into sin for a season in life. But he also sees the good times that we begin to go through in life. And sometimes you don't really find out who Jesus is until you get into that storm. Until you're in that situation that seems to overwhelm you. You have no other dependency but on God and God alone. And when you're in those situations in life, then you begin to know just who God is. Just the power and the authority that God has in his life. You begin to realize how merciful he is. And we begin to realize how desperate that we need a Savior in our life. You see, when Jesus was feeding the 5,000, it wasn't the first miracle that the disciples had seen. You see, the disciples only seen that also, but the disciples also seen the water turn into wine. The same disciples that was on this boat. They seen these miracles happen. They began to see sight that was restored. They seen the lame that could walk again. They seen limbs that were crooked come straight. They seen leprosy that was healed. They seen demons beginning to come out of people. But they were in an overwhelming situation. Even though they knew Jesus, they had a personal relationship with Jesus. Can I tell you, they had doubt in an overwhelming situation. But it took a terrifying storm to see not only his power, but the authority that Jesus had. Jesus had to make it personal to his disciples, because soon he was going to leave. Soon he was going to return to his Father. So he had to put them in a personal, overwhelming situation for their faith to be activated and their faith to be orchestrated in life. You see, in order to overcome different overwhelming situations in life, we must be willing to cross through chaos. Did he not tell them, I need you to go? And he stayed. He went and prayed to his Father. But he told them, I want you to go. When they departed, when they were obedient, never did they think that they were going to come in a situation that was overwhelming them. Never did they think that they were going to come in a situation that was life-threatening. Never did they think that they were going to come into a situation that it was so life-threatening. They were thinking, what are we going to do? And they didn't even recognize who was coming to them, but it was Jesus. But you see, the stronger the storm, the closer you are to the point of deliverance. They had to be placed in that storm. And when they were placed in that storm, overwhelming them, they had to keep looking, keep working, keep rowing. And no matter the situation, they were looking to Jesus. And when they seen him, they began to realize there was something operating on the inside of them. No matter what the storm is that we have in life, no matter if it's a big or a small situation in our life, it can all seem a little overwhelming. And in those overwhelming moments or times of life, if we stay overwhelmed, we're going to take on the baggage, we're going to take on the luggage that God has never intended for us to have. But when we keep focused on what's overwhelming us, we keep our eyes off of Jesus and we keep our eyes on the storm. And when we keep our eyes focused on the storm, that's when that fear begins to creep in and the overwhelming situation begins to take over in our life. So I want to encourage you today, no matter what the situation is in life. I remember when mine were little and running around crazy and just being boys, really. I felt like I was sinking.